Hello plant friends, my name is Victoria and you're watching Plantastics. If you're interested in learning how I built this bioactive vivarium for my crested gecko, then let's roll the intro and get started. So today we're going to be building a fully equipped vivarium for a crested gecko, covering everything from the structure and heating to airflow, lighting, and live plants. A proper setup is crucial because your gecko's health is going to be highly dependent on it. You can also set up something like this just for your plants, but this one is going to be for a gecko, so there's going to be some considerations that you may not have whenever you're building one to house plants solely. So you want to be able to have a very stable and self-sustaining and visually appealing environment for your gecko. I also just enjoy vivariums and terrariums that are incredibly realistic looking. So whenever you're choosing your enclosure and you're preparing it, you're going to aim for something that's 18 by 18 by 36. That's the minimum enclosure size for a crested gecko, and that is what this one is. It's an 18 by 18 by 36. So you are going to want to prepare a background, and that is what I'm doing right now. So I have been collecting different things, and those things are spray foam, driftwood, lava rocks. I've also created what you're seeing here, which is a ventilation system, which I'll get to that more in detail later in the video. And I also have terracotta pots to wick up moisture, so that way, unlike plastic pots, it will be able to release some of that moisture into the air. And also I have a ton of moss and other realistic elements. You're going to want to choose a bioactive substrate mix for all the different reasons that I'm going to list, and that is because you want to have something that is organic, something that's going to retain moisture without being too soggy, and you also want something in there to kind of break up and create air pockets. So what I ended up doing was mixing moss, organic soil, and then also tree bark, so that way I have those air pockets because the roots do not need to suffocate in the substrate. Something else is that you want to add safe plants that are going to thrive in high humidity and low light. So geckos are not known, or when I say geckos, I'm referring to crested geckos, but crested geckos are not known to eat plant leaves. They do like fruit and nectar and insects, but they are not really known to eat the leaves. So you're probably wondering, why does having non-toxic plants matter? And it's just because they're incredibly clumsy little creatures. So they'll go for a cricket and catch a leaf instead. So you just want something that if they eat it on accident, they're not going to be harmed. And you also want things that are going to thrive in high humidity because there is high humidity required, especially at night, and then you want to have lower humidity in the daytime. So plants that thrive in that environment are just really going to grow best for you. And low light is important. It honestly depends on what lighting you're using. So I use different grow lights, so I'm able to use and grow some different plants. So you're limited on based off of your lighting that you choose. Something else is how to arrange plants for the most aesthetic and functional purpose. I selected Hoyas, ferns, different begonias, and air plants because the air plants are really great because my gecko loves them, because when he's shedding, he'll like run through them several times and it helps him remove his shed. You don't want to have sharp things in the enclosure, but things like air plants or maybe some rough bark is something they actually benefit from, so it does serve a function. It's also really pretty And you're gonna see that I use air plants to kind of hide some of the zip ties I'll be using. Hoyas are really great because they look amazing. They have really large leaves, some of the varieties do, and they also bloom and produce nectar, which my gecko likes. And ferns allow for really bushy, they love humidity and low light, and they offer hiding spots. And the Rex begonias are the same. And water is going to flow down based off of how you have your mister set. So you can point them to or away certain plants. So that way you can control how much water they're getting. Next is the Hardscape and Decorations. So you're going to want to add a lot of branches, cork bark, and climbing surfaces. This is going to be highly beneficial because you're going to be able to have lots of different places for them to hide. You're also going to have this amazing visual texture by having a variety of different things for your hardscape. And you also, in creating those hiding places, not only is your gecko going to feel more safe, but it's going to be more fun when they're hunting for crickets and stuff. If they have a bare enclosure, not only is your gecko going to be incredibly stressed, but they're also just not going to have as much fun hunting and looking because everything's going to be in plain view. Another thing is that if you have lots of branches in your background, it's going to allow almost like a trellis and make it look more natural as the vining plants, if you choose to add them, start to grow onto the hardscape. I didn't end up using any artificial vines. There are several you can buy at plant stores. Instead, I'm opting to take multiple vines and kind of wrap them together and train them to be like larger vines, if that makes sense. And to keep them from being uprooted, I'm going to be kind of like getting them to wrap around the branches in the background so they are really secure. Something else is in creating your hardscape and decorations, you want to think about like basking and hiding areas. And I have a place kind of towards the top where he loves to go in wintertime. And as soon as he wakes up, like when all the lights turn off, he goes and he basks and he kind of just like wakes up, and then he'll go about exploring the rest of his enclosure. So having a small ceramic heat emitter is really nice. You don't need a large one. You just need to have a place where they can go if they get too cold. Another thing is like hiding areas. So you can see kind of close to the camera, there is a coconut. And I also have these pieces of trunk that have holes bored into them for him to hide in. So I didn't do this last time. I had to retroactively create hiding spaces. So this is really good because he will definitely feel safe, and you probably won't be able to see him because after all the foliage grows in and is planted, you're really not going to be able to even notice the hiding spots that I've built into the background. Another thing in terms of decorations is using moss and just leaf litter and other decor to enhance the ecosystem. So the moss is really great because you're able to just add more green because you ultimately want your enclosure to look as green as possible because it's just going to look more healthy and more visually appealing the more greenery you have in your enclosure. So you can do that with sheet moss, or you can actually grow your own moss. I have moss that I had and I just left it in a cup for an extended period of time and it started to grow. So I did put that in some of the more moist spots in the background. Something else is leaf litter. If you are making a bioactive setup, you're going to want leaf litter for several reasons. And one of those is that way the isopods have a place to hide, and it also gives the springtails something to eat because that is naturally going to break down. So isopods are great, but you need to give them places to hide too because geckos will eat them just like they will any other insect. So having leaf litter or even some smaller hollowed out sticks or logs will allow them places to hide from your geckos so they don't become his next meal. You can also add other decor, like I have this driftwood, and then some people add in rocks and other things. I tried to keep the bottom of my enclosure as cluttered and messy and just filled with plants as possible, so there's really not any decor or rocks or anything that you can see. The next thing is heating and airflow. So this background I mentioned earlier actually has a ventilation system set up. And the reason you want ventilation is so that way you have better control of humidity and the air doesn't get stagnant. So you have crested geckos and they like to have lower humidity in the daytime and a spike at night. And the best way I have been able to create that in my enclosures is by having a series of fans at the top that run in the day. So they're drawing air out, so they're decreasing humidity. And they are off at night, so that way humidity stays the same. And I have misters that run for 30 seconds every 12 hours. So there's consistent moisture going into the enclosure, and that is good. The only thing that changes to alter that humidity is whether the fans are turned on or off. So in addition to having the fans on the top, I also have fans in the square piping that I showed you earlier. And that serves just to keep the air circulating. So that is not actually drawing air out. It is just making sure air from the bottom is moving and circulating throughout the enclosure, so no part gets stagnant. And the reason I'm saying you need to avoid stagnant air is because crested geckos are very delicate creatures, and in nature they have wind and other elements that keep the air around them moving, and you want to be able to simulate that. It also helps preventing mold and some other things from growing if you have consistent airflow in your enclosure. Something else is installing heating elements, and that is just if needed. You also need to have something to where you can monitor the temperature and the humidity. You can go anywhere from super basic to the just basic ones that you can get at the store, or you can get something more advanced that's digital and actually gives your phone alerts, which can be really great if you're gone over the weekend and someone is just like there to watch, just in case like your water reservoir runs out and your misters are empty and not able to spray. So for heating elements, honestly, I do have a thermostat and a ceramic heat emitter, but it is only on in from spring and winter, because in summer and fall, it's really not cold enough. So I have mine set to 72 so he can kind of get close and be in a warmer spot. The best thing about having a thermostat is it's something that you attach to the ceramic heat emitter, and it turns on and off depending on the temperature inside of the enclosure. You don't want a heating element that is just going to be on all the time, because that could get your gecko to be too hot. It could cook your plants, and you just really don't want that. You also don't even need a large heating element. Some people don't even have them at all. Instead, they have a space heater in the room during winter to just keep the room warmer. I found it more fiscally conservative to just use a ceramic bulb as opposed to heating an entire room, because no one stays in this room all the time. So something else is that you're going to want to have these. The next thing I'm going to talk about is lighting and final touches. So whenever you are towards the end and you have completely planted everything, you are going to want to have some really nice plants, and you also want the right lighting just to promote plant growth and also for your gecko's health. So if you didn't know this, you want to avoid any lights that are red or blue, like the ones that are sold in the reptile section. They can actually cause a lot of harm. So the ones that I recommend are going to be linked below. I used the Barina under cabinet lighting, and I also have a GE PAR 38 bulb over top suspended. Something else is to really focus on the placement of the lights and to avoid overheating, ensure even coverage. So I think something people kind of forget about is just how much light plants need. Since our eyes are able to perceive light at a greater ability than plants, we sometimes can think we're giving plants enough light when it is nowhere near enough. So the thing with the Barina lights is that I think I have like 6 of them on the top, and then I have 2 on the side pointed inward, and I have that PAR 38. And that sounds like a lot, but it is perfect because it keeps everything photosynthesizing at a rate to where they can constantly grow and even flower. I've had Spanish moss bloom in my vivariums. I've had orchids, air plants, Hoyas. If it can bloom, it's bloomed in one of my vivariums. And that is just a testament to proper humidity, airflow, and lighting. Another thing is to avoid overheating, and that is just making sure that you have your lights spaced out. Even though they are grow lights and they're not intended to be used as heating lights, they still get pretty warm, and that's just another reason to make sure not only that your vivarium has proper airflow, but the room that you have them in does too. And you can do that by just running fans, like your overhead fan or just one of the standing fans that you can get at like a big box store. And that really helps out in dispersing the heat. Something else you need to do is every single week you need to check all of your elements, your timers, your misting systems, and so on and so forth. So sometimes, at least where I live, we do have storms where our lights are knocked out for an extended period of time. And what that does is it's pretty chaotic because I have to reset a large number of things. Like, you think of your oven and your microwave time being turned off, but like imagine that on a much larger scale. So one of the things that I recommend are the digital plugs, because those are not going to be disturbed by power outages, unlike the manual ones where you have buttons in 30-minute increments you press down. Basically, if you've seen one, you know what I'm talking about. So I would opt for the digital ones, but like there are some things that it just doesn't matter. There's not really a solution. Like my misters, whenever the power is off for 6 hours or more, I have to reset them, which honestly isn't too big of a deal. It's just only happened one time when I was gone. I was on an international trip for a month and the misters were off. Luckily, that was before I owned my gecko, so everything was just super dry in the vivarium, but because it has glass on all 4 sides, nothing like died. It was miraculous because basically as soon as we got on a plane, we had a hurricane, knocked out all the lights, so for 4 weeks the vivarium didn't have any source of water. And somehow everything lived. I guess everything was just in a really healthy state before it got thrown into such a stressful state. I really like they're called Kasi plugs or Kasi plugs, Kasi. I'll have those linked below. And I like those because you can set those to your local times, sunset and sunrise. So that way you are more likely to have blooms and stuff. And also it is going to reflect the seasons. So I really, really like those. You can also turn them on and off remotely. Something that I recommend if you are going to be using a system like the misting system that I have is I highly recommend you only use distilled water, which is annoying because you're going to have to carry it in. I only go through 1 gallon of distilled water a week with my system. And you want distilled water because these misting systems are a little bit pricey and they are super delicate and small, and cleaning them is going to be difficult. So you are going to prevent any buildup of minerals, and you're going to extend the life of your misting system because some of them, depending on what brand you go with, I ended up going with a no-name brand. But if you get like Miss King or some of the top name brands, like they are an investment and you just don't want them to like, kaput out on you really early on. Another thing is adding microfauna and cycling the vivarium. So people often think about cycling aquariums, and that's all well and good. But I really think everyone, from the actual people who build vivariums to the creatures that end up inhabiting them, would benefit from vivariums kind of being grown in. So notably, the vivarium I built before this one, I had for a full year before I ever moved anything into that. And I did that to see if I could manipulate the humidity to where it is what they need. So it's like, I want to say it's between 40 and 60% in the daytime, and then 60% and higher at night. That's what you want to aim for. So I allowed for all of the plants to grow in, and also I gave myself time to be able to see if I could create that with fans and venting systems. And also I wanted to see if I could keep the temperature a certain way. So I basically did trial and error trying to simulate the right environment before I ever ended up actually even looking to purchase geckos. You're going to want to introduce isopods and springtails for waste breakdown. One of the many benefits of a bioactive vivarium is that you do not have to clean as much. Now, that doesn't mean you don't clean at all. You're going to want to use distilled water and vinegar to clean the glass on the inside and the outside. And then I use a distilled water mister, like a handheld one, to kind of spray any droppings down to the bottom where the isopods are. And in establishing those, they're going to create their own little colony, and they will have a population that is the equivalent of what the waste is in the enclosure. So you want to start kind of small. You don't want to get like 1,000 isopods for like an 18 by 18 by 36 because they're just not going to have enough to eat. And something else is that when isopods don't have enough food, they can start eating the roots of some of your plants. They like to eat the trichomes off of air plants. So you just want to start small with those. Don't worry that you don't have enough. Probably like 5 or 6 for an enclosure this size should be sufficient. One of the important things about cycling is that you just really know, you give yourself enough time to know it, to measure the humidity and temperature and airflow. You are able to really feel like confident that you are providing the best possible environment for your gecko. A lot of people really kind of just seem like they get drunk at brunch and then just like impulsively go and buy one. And you just really want this to be thought out. It is a small animal, but it is completely dependent on you. So if you don't provide what they need, they really have no remedy. So that's why I am a huge advocate for making sure you cycle your tank. You are able to really know and measure all the temperature, humidity, and airflow. So that way everything's incredibly stable, because as long as it's in that range and you have everything else taken care of, you can count that your gecko is going to have those needs met. So that way, if anything happens, you can rule out whether it is something to do with husbandry, because so many reptiles sadly perish as a result of improper, poor husbandry. Unlike cats and dogs, they're really not, sadly, able to cry out for help. They just slowly suffer, and normally by the time people realize things have gotten really bad, the animal is sadly not able to bounce back. The last thing is the final showcase and gecko, introduction. So in making sure everything is like finished and whatnot, you are going to want everything to dry, and I mean absolutely everything. So this took me about a week. So these are lots of clips kind of put together, and obviously it's sped up super fast and cut. I cut so much footage of me building it just because I thought it'd be boring to you guys. So the spray foam needs time to like cure and set, because you do not want to put anything in there that is sticky or tacky. You also want the silicone to cure too. You do not want any of those super strong, harsh chemicals in there. So something I ended up doing is I put a box fan on top of it to draw air out. I also tried to wait and build this whenever it was not raining, so that way everything would dry more quickly, because things do not dry in 90% humidity in the same way that they do when the humidity is like 20%. So that's just something to keep in mind, because silicone literally smells so bad, to me at least, and after a few days you just don't smell it at all, and that is your magic time. You want to be able to not smell anything, for everything to be cured, ready to go, so that way you don't have any problems. So your gecko, I guess I could talk about like finding a gecko. So there are many pet stores that are just, they have shareholders. They're these major corporations which secure your bag, you do you, but they are really prioritizing profits and margins over the quality of life of these animals. So picking a well-bred animal, as weird as that sounds, is so important, because there are people that have purchased really cheap geckos, or they later find out that the parentage was not a good match, or they were inbred. So now they have all these health problems, or their gecko just perishes way too soon, even with proper husbandry. And that is just such a heartbreaking experience. So I do not want you to have an experience like that. So making sure you get a reputable breeder is paramount. And not every person that is basically breeding crested geckos out of their basement or house or wherever they are is reputable. So you want to be able to trace their parentage, and you also want to be able to like ask questions like, do the parents have health problems? Like, how old are they? There are some people that have actually been breeding crested geckos since, when they became pets. So they were thought to be extinct, and they were rediscovered in 1994. And now they're one of the most popular reptiles as a pet. So this person's been breeding geckos since the early 2000s. I really found great luck finding people that were knowledgeable and ethical in their practices on Morph Market. Now, does that mean everybody on Morph Market is ethical and practical? No. But I found somebody, and that's how I found my crested gecko, whose name is Gremlin. So he is like really just like super sweet, but when he was a baby, he used to like hide from me. But he now comes to the front of the enclosure when he sees me, but I think that's just because he associates me with food. So we've come a long way from him literally hiding from me to being, I think, more tolerable of me. And I measure him every month, and I do that by putting a cricket on my hand and he'll jump on my hand. I'll measure him very quickly and then I just put him back into his enclosure. I do not handle him a lot. So at this point in the build, you can see that I have put everything together, and now we are just waiting for everything to cure. And you can see I put this box fan on top, and you can also see that the spray foam has not cured because it looks super wet, and you can see it because it's pressed up against the glass. And that little black wire is taped so that way I don't end up like stepping on it or ripping it out. Sadly, the thing about this build is if one of the fans fails in the background ventilation system, there's no real way for me to replace it. So it's very important that I keep this wire to where it couldn't be like ripped out or harmed in some way. And I know a lot of people talk about making sure that you do not leave the doors open like I'm doing. But if it's just overnight, you know you're not going to bump into them, I say it's okay. I did the actual background onto a piece of foam to just not be restricted, because if you actually spray directly on the glass instead of on a foam piece, when you go to cut and put the moss and other just like details on, it is really, really hard because your elbows can't move and whatnot. This PVC thing that I set up, I didn't actually end up using. I was going to set it up to a humidifier system, but the misting system I already had ended up being just fine at maintaining humidity. So here are all the different plants. I mentioned I like Hoyas and ferns and begonias. I also have some peperomias in here. And I tried to go for like a color palette, if that makes sense. So obviously there's a ton of green, but something you may not notice is that my gecko is actually the same color as the wood that I picked for my background. Now, something a lot of people, I didn't know until I got one, is that crested geckos change colors. They do something called firing up, and the younger they are, the more they are going to do it. And it's just like something they do when like they have something that they're hunting, or they're really warm, or they're happy. Sometimes they misfire and half of their body will change colors, but not the other half, which is really funny. I haven't honestly seen my gecko do that, but I've seen people post pictures of it online, so it does happen. And it's just something that they do. But anyways, like I don't think change colors to blend in. They kind of are just like mood rings, and they kind of just like change colors to match their vibe. So I loved this vining plant. It is in the ficus family, or it has ficus in the actual name. And then I get so many Hoyas from trades. I love trading. I love getting new plants, but it can kind of get a little pricey. So trades are definitely the way to go. And here you can see I have been collecting things to build this vivarium for a really long time. So like collecting stuff to build your vivarium is honestly the thing that takes the most time. Like there are lots of different websites people recommend, like Josh's Frogs is something it seems like a ton of vivarium building people use, but unfortunately they are just sold out of everything. And the big like driftwood pieces that I ended up using, like I ordered those online and like just like kept returning until I got 2 pieces that I thought were pretty, but it's like gambling. You know what I mean? Like you have no idea, unless they guarantee they're going to send what's pictured, you have no idea what they're going to send you. So here I am adding in that substrate and getting the finishing touches ready. You want to have a drainage layer. I know everybody says that. Sometimes we talk about doing things and we don't exactly explain why we're doing them. So the reason we're adding drainage is because I talked about creating this really nice airy mix, And an airy mix is only as great as it is its drainage. So you can have the most wonderful airy mix, but if it's just sitting in water, it's like you used clay or something that wasn't airy at all. So you want to be able to have all that water go somewhere. It is an enclosed space, so you're like, where's it going to go? Well, it's going to go in the bottom underneath those rocks. And I like using something like, this is aluminum screening, so it will never rust. It will not look super like dirty. And I do that, and then I put the aquarium gravel over top, which is super dusty, by the way. You might want to rinse it before, but since it's not going to be used for an aquarium, it doesn't really matter. Here I am making that mix. It's going to be bark, only bark. It's not going to have perlite or charcoal or anything. And it's super coarse, and you want that so you can have those air pockets. And then I also found this. This soil is always on sale. I think no one buys it because it's so small and like nobody's really using it. I also use this beneficial fungi, and that actually helps your plant roots. It's very beneficial. I'm not really going to write a thesis or explain it to you in super great detail, but it helps everything be established. And if you have nice fungi and bacteria, you kind of are better off at preventing bad bacteria, because with a ton of water and not enough oxygen to the roots and bad bacteria, you have the perfect combination for root rot. So by having a drainage layer, airier mixture, and beneficial fungi, you are really setting yourself up for success. Now is everyone's favorite part, and that is planting everything up. So if you have a part of your background that kind of is more deep into the background, if that makes sense, you want to plant your plants that have less water needs, because the water is going to drip down the least resistance and it's not going to go back into those crevices. So I ended up putting a fern really deep in there, and it ended up not getting enough water. So I'm going to replace that with something, but I haven't figured out what. It might be some type of Hoya that kind of just likes to be dry. So you can see I have got this so pretty. And in having that spider wood, I'm able to attach additional branches. So you can see I have some birch and I have some vining. And what I use is I use zip ties. And those are not the prettiest, but they will be hidden by air plants. They're going to be hidden by the vines that I'm going to end up training. And I am using a lot of the plants from the last enclosure, but I was very, very thorough in rinsing them off, because in my last enclosure, I had a serious family of slugs and snails, and they didn't have any predators, so they just multiplied, and they kind of ran out of waste, so they started eating my plants, which I didn't really care for, because I had my Harella retrocala, which is a miniature orchid. It's very beautiful, and it bloomed for the first time, and half of the flower was eaten off by a snail. So I was like, oh, these guys have got to go, and they're not in this new enclosure, so they're gone. They are happily outside somewhere, because I took a lot of the old stuff out of the old one and let it go, because I used all native isopods and springtails, so I'm not like introducing invasive things. So begin with the end in mind. You can see that these plants are not super large, but you don't want to get super crazy mature plants, because they're going to die back. You want plants that are kind of like starter size or a little bit on the medium to smaller size, so that way they get a chance to grow in, because you don't want to put in this big, beautiful greenhouse grown plant and have it die back, because it's just going to make you sad and it's going to look kind of terrible. So I like to use E6000. Hot glue is just a little too hot. It does end up killing the bottom leaves. Something else I do is I take off the old, like dry and withered pieces of the air plants. So here you can see me using, it's like something you use to secure vines to a trellis, and I use those temporarily until the glue dries. I also am trimming off some of the dry bits on the air plants. You can totally trim off the dead on plants. There's no shade in that. Nobody wants to see a bunch of brown leaves. So you do you. If you want that like natural look of like having some dead in with some like new growth, that's totally fine. That's not my vibe. So I like to remove as much brown and spent as possible. So now you can see it and it's absolutely beautiful. So you can see I have 2 Barina lights on the sides. I have the ceramic heat emitter. Those are the 2 larger fans I talked about. There's the Par 38. And then I also have this black light on top, and that just helps create better coloring. It doesn't actually create a ton of light, but it gives light that actually shows the plants to be true to color. So you can see it's actually been several months since I set this up. I just wanted you to see what it looks like. And what my hand is doing right now is it is describing the airflow that circulates inside, the one where I talked about how to keep the air from being stagnant but keeping humidity stable. Because the ones on top are to decrease humidity. And then I used double-sided tape, and I got these cute handles and I put them on there. It just makes it look so elevated. And then my husband built this piece of furniture, which is nice. He's not a carpenter, so it's not perfect, but it's functional. And he also built it so that way I could hide all my cords, and the slats on the sides are large enough to put cords out. And also it's really great because I'm able to get the what are they called? The long plugs and secure them on. So you can see I did it with zip ties. I also have a heated water reservoir, and that's why it's in glass. And I keep my crickets here, and this is how I give them water so they don't drown. You can find it basically any pet store. And the heated water is seasonal. I don't have it like that all the time. That is just for the winter time, because who wants to be sprayed with cold water in the middle of winter? I know I wouldn't. But yeah, that's like a luxury thing. You don't have to have that. I don't think that they would suffer immensely. It's just like, I wouldn't want that, so I don't think he'd want that either. And you can see the difference in lighting. So I have warm light and then I have cool light. And I can also change that to where it's like moonlight and stuff like that. I haven't really played around with the vivarium specific light at the top. So you can see all the misters. So I have them spaced out a good bit so that way there aren't any dry spots. If you enjoyed this video, be sure to like and share it with your friends. Other people love building vivariums. Also be sure to comment what your favorite plant is. This is what it looks like now. It's been quite some time since I built it. And yeah, subscribe to see more videos like this. Goodbye.